Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. In today's card, I'm using the Ice Layer stencils with my Color Burst powders. And I thought when I saw these stencils that they would be perfect for this application. So here are my Color Bursts. I just have the bright set. And then here is the Ice Layer stencil I'm talking about. It's made by Faber-Castell. It's new and it's very inexpensive. It's like $3.50 or $3.99. You can use them over and over again. I've used this one multiple times and you can see how it peels away from where I store it, and it's extremely sticky, even though I've used it multiple times and washed it. All right, so I'm going to start by laying this sticky side up, and I'm going to put my Canson XL mixed media paper on top of it. I'm just going to really press down to make sure it's secured in place and that there's no air underneath any of the lines here so that I don't get any of the color bursts underneath the stencil. I'm using a larger piece of paper that I'm going to cut back to an A2 size. So I'm going to spritz it with water first just so I could see where my color is going. I'm going to use purple, blue, and green. So I'm going to start by just dropping some purple here and there. You can see it's a very intense powder. And then I'll move on to blue, and I'm just sort of shaking it. You could also squeeze it, but I find that a lot comes out when I squeeze it, so I just do a light shake. And then finally some green. I'm just going to make sure that I have a little bit of color in all these little segments. And then this is where the magic happens. I'm going to take my water and I'm really going to spritz this. And whenever I use these powders, I use a lot of water. And you don't really have to worry about diluting it because the pigment is so intense that it really doesn't get diluted. So you can see I'm putting loads of water on here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more to some areas that I didn't get some color because they are separated by the stencil. And then I'm just going to make sure I get more water on that and get that moving. You can see I've got a lot of really dark areas, and that's because I have too much color in there. But if you move here, you can see I've got a chunk of powder, so I'm just going to move it around just to get it to dissolve in that puddle that's right there because I don't want any chunks. And that was just in a couple of spots. So then I just tap that in to make sure that I didn't have that anymore. And now I'm going to heat this just to speed it up because it's going to take a really long time to dry with all this water. And you can see I'm using a tissue, but I should have used a paper towel because there's so much ink that comes up. But you can see that it really doesn't lighten the color. It does a little bit, but that's just because I'm removing this big puddle of really dark pigment. So I'm just going to heat it up and I'm just kind of tap it to get rid of those puddles. And it's really looking gorgeous now. I mean, really beautiful. Also notice that I'm heating this stencil, which is kind of plasticky, so I wasn't sure if I would ruin the stencil by heating it, but I heat it for a long time and it didn't affect the stencil at all. So I am so impressed with the quality of this product. Now that I've got my cardstock all dry, I'm going to take just another clean tissue, and I'm just going to clean up all the excess water that's on the stencil and around it, because when I peel off the stencil, I don't want any color to get inside these white lines. I want it to be a nice, crisp, clean image. So I'm just going to make sure that nothing is wet. Now, as I pull this off my craft mat, you'll be able to see how sticky it is. It's sticking to my craft mat. So I'm going to slowly peel this away, and when you peel it, you want to stay close to the cardstock and just peel it in just really carefully, a little bit at a time. I mentioned in a previous video that I did tear the paper once, but only once, and this is watercolor paper, and I heat it and everything, and I didn't get any tears at all. And you can see how absolutely beautiful this is. Not a single little drop of water got underneath that stencil. I'm going to create a couple of cards with this watercolor panel. The first, I'm going to use my Avery Elle Custom Panels, this die here. It's kind of a diagonal die. It's not quite a right angle, so it's just a little bit slanted. I'm going to place this on top of about where I want my design to be, and then I'll place my die and position it. I have to get my sentiment. I'm using it from the Bejeweled set by Altenew. The reason why I chose this sentiment is because it's block letters, and I didn't want anything curly or round because of the design behind it, so I wanted to kind of match that. All right, once I position my die, then I'm going to adhere it with surgical tape to the watercolor, and then I'll take this is my Neenah that it's going to adhere to. I'm going to pull this out, and then I'll run this part through the Big Shot. And because it's oversized, I had to cut a little bit off on the side. All right, so now I'm going to trim this out on the left and the right so that I can put it on an A2 card size. And then I'm going to take a piece of black cardstock and I'm going to use that same die and I'll cut that out. And then I'm going to take the die again and I'm going to move it up just a little bit from the edge, make sure it's the same on the whole entire edge, and then secure that in place again with some tape and run it through my Big Shot. You could mat it to a full piece of black cardstock, but I like to be really frugal about my cardstock, so I just cut a piece that I could add to the bottom. And you can see how that's going to fit. And it just sort of outlines my design. Now I'm going to take my watercolor panel and put some ATG tape runner on the back and adhere it to my A2 card. And then I'm going to add some 2A glue pen to my black outline and just press it right up against my watercolor panel. And then I'll just trim the edges from the back with a scissor. Because my design is really bright and intense and pretty busy, I don't like to cover the whole card, which is why I'm making 2 cards. And so that's why I also added some white to kind of tone it down a little bit. So I'm going to use my MISTI to stamp my sentiment with some Hero Arts black ink, and that will be my first card. I'm keeping it really simple because I want the focus to really be on that watercolor panel. Now for my next card, I'm going to take whatever's left over and I'm going to put it in my trimmer so I can get a straight line. And then I'm going to add this at a diagonal. So I also cut the side so that it was 5.5 inches wide. And then I'll adhere it to another card base that's just A2 size. Now I'm going to put my stencil back on. I'm just going to line it up and just press it down to make sure it's securely in place. You may have to kind of work it a little bit. It's hard to go on top of paper. It's so much easier to put the paper on top of the stencil because this is really sticky. All right, so I'm just going to take a Post-it and I'm going to cover up the watercolor part so I don't hit that when I'm doing my sponging here. I have a sponge dauber and I'm going to use some Simon Says Stamp Fog ink. I experimented with a bunch of different colors and I actually would have liked it to be a tiny bit lighter, but I didn't really have anything lighter than this. But it is a pretty nice light gray ink. And so I'm just going to cover the whole thing, and that way it sort of continues my design. And then again, I'm just going to peel this away really carefully, trying to keep my stencil close to the cardstock. And I've had really good luck doing it this way. And you can see as I'm pulling it away, I'm not worried about it sticking to itself. So I can kind of crumble it up and kind of put it into, it actually ends up in almost a ball by the time I'm done with this. I'm just more concerned about making sure that I get it off the cardstock really carefully in slow sections. And you can see it is a ball of a mess when I'm done. But the great thing about this stencil is that I just pull it apart and it goes back to its original shape. Anyway, so I went ahead and I stamped Wishing the Best for You from the Altenew You Are set on some black cardstock, and I cut it out. It's longer than 5 1/4 because when you put it on a diagonal, it's actually longer than the width of the card. I used a font, again, that was more kind of squarish and not so round to match the design, and I put it right up against the watercolor panel. And that way I have kind of a divider between the 2 different design colors. I noticed I had a little extra white on the right side, so I just went through my trimmer and cut off maybe like 1/8 of an inch so that it would be even. And those are the cards for today. So I hope you enjoyed seeing these stencils in action, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.